The sea was quiet this evening. The waves barely interested in moving. Somewhere off the northern coast of France, we drift, slowly, deliberately, perhaps unnecessarily. I, the navigator, have taken it upon myself to record this coastline in painful detail. Not for glory, not for gold, but for reasons even I no longer remember. Tonight, I open my journal once again to document cliffs that aren't very tall and towns that may or may not exist. Let us begin. Day 11. The wind was mild. The sea indifferent. We reached the edge of the northern land, a place the locals call Bray Dunes. It is flat, very flat. I drew 3 lines in my scroll to represent this. There are no cliffs. There is sand. It appears to be beige, possibly light beige. Further west lies Dunkirk. It has a harbour, and in that harbour there are boats. Some are made of wood, others are also wood. I asked a man what they fish for. He said, mostly fish. The coastline bends gently here. It's a modest bend, a humble curve. I made note of it anyway, for the sake of completeness. Westward to Dunkirk, the coastline curved, but just barely, a modest curve, a whisper of a bend. It's the sort of curve that makes you think, ah yes, the earth is probably round. Dunkirk appeared on the horizon. It is a port. There are boats. Many are made of wood. Some of the wood floats. Others do not. This is considered normal. I spoke to a fisherman. He said they catch mostly fish. I asked if there were any other options. He said, not really. There is a tower here. I believe it is a lighthouse. It does not seem to be currently lighting anything. Still, it stands. Perhaps as a suggestion. Past Calais, toward Wissant. We continued. Past Calais, the cliffs arrive. Not suddenly. They ease in, like someone trying not to interrupt. They are chalky. They are technically cliffs. I've seen walls with more enthusiasm, but still, they qualify. Atop them, grass grows sideways in the wind. A seagull stared at me. I nodded. It nodded back. We understood each other. We were both very tired. Below, the waves tried to impress the cliffs, slapping them repeatedly. The cliffs did not respond. I noted this in the margins of my journal. Persistent ocean. Unimpressed cliff. We now approach Wissant, a beach town, known for having a beach. There are stones here. They are small. I picked one up. I put it down. The wind blew. It tasted like salt and a minor disappointment. Day 12. We departed Wissant under a sky that looked unsure of itself. The clouds formed vague suggestions of shapes, none of them helpful. The wind had taken the morning off. We drifted. It was, in every sense, unremarkable. We soon reached Cap Gris-Nez, which means grey nose. It is not clear why the nose is grey, or why the land has a nose at all. Perhaps the French see things we do not. The cliffs here are taller than before. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Enough to make you nod, slowly, and think, yes, that is definitely higher than the previous cliff. I recorded this elevation change in my journal. It will not matter to anyone, but it is done. There is a narrow path at the top, used, I assume, by goats or poets. Neither were present. I continued. Further south, the coast becomes indecisive. It wavers between rocks and sand, dunes and grass, as though it cannot decide what sort of coastline it wishes to be. I sympathize. At Ambletears, we saw a fort, a squat, round structure surrounded by water at high tide. It sits alone, staring at the sea, with what I can only describe as quiet resignation. No one was guarding it. No one was attacking it. There was no reason for it to be there. And yet, there it was. Steady, round, possibly bored. I sketched it in the margins. A circle with a flag. The flag was optional. We approached Vimeiro by midday. A beach town again, the third of its kind, and unlikely to be the last. Children were seen throwing pebbles. One of them missed the ocean entirely. The pebble landed near my boot. I picked it up. It was smooth and unambitious. I admired that. Lunch was taken aboard the ship. It consisted of bread, cheese, and a single raisin. The raisin was uninvited, but welcomed. The coastline continued, as coastlines do. It was still France. It was still land. I made a note of both facts. Day 13. We awoke to fog. Thick, persistent, and deeply committed to being in the way. The sea was quiet, as though waiting for the fog to finish whatever it was doing. I could see no land, but I knew it was still there. I trusted the coastline. It had not abandoned us yet. Eventually, shapes emerged. Low hills, a smudge of trees, and then Boulogne-sur-Mer, a city by the sea. It claims to be historic. All cities do. There were houses stacked on hills, like stubborn goats, and a cathedral dome that tried very hard to be noticed. I gave it a polite nod. It seemed satisfied. I did not go ashore. The land looked busy. There were carts and fish and people moving with purpose. That is not my speed. Instead, I observed from the deck. The harbour was full of boats. One was painted green. This was, admittedly, the most exciting thing that happened today. A man on the dock was shouting about mackerel. He shouted it several times. Either he was proud of the mackerel or angry at them, possibly both. Further south, we passed cliffs again, taller this time, so tall that even the fog seemed reluctant to climb them. I stared at the cliff for a long time. I think the cliff stared back. I made a sketch of it. It was just a rectangle, but a tall rectangle. I labelled it Big Cliff, possibly watching. We sailed onward to Équihen-Plage, a village with an uncertain name and an even more uncertain beach. It was there. That is all I can say about it. There were boats on the sand, old ones, turned upside down and used as huts. At first, I thought this was a mistake. Then I realized it was on purpose. I made a note. Reversed boats, excellent roofs, poor boats. The day ended with light rain. The kind of rain that isn't really falling, just hovering, slightly disappointed. I returned to my cabin, not particularly wet, but noticeably damp. The kind of damp that makes you question your choices. I lit a lantern, opened my journal, and wrote. Today, the land remained where we left it. That is enough. Day 14. We began the morning with a decision. Sail or don't. After careful deliberation and a moment of staring at a damp rope, we chose to sail. The sea offered no comment. The sky, equally undecided, remained grey. Our course took us past Hardelot Plage, a beach town with an elegant name, and absolutely no urgency to prove itself. There were dunes, there was sand, there were beach huts arranged with the kind of precision that suggests someone cared once, and then promptly stopped. I saw a man walking his dog. The dog appeared to be in charge. I respected that. Further south, we passed Saint-Cissy. The map assured me it was there, though the fog made it more of a suggestion. I could just make out rooftops and a flag flapping in confusion. I recorded its presence anyway, out of habit or guilt, possibly both. The coastline straightened for a while. Not dramatically, just enough to be noticeable if you're the sort of person who notices that sort of thing. I am that sort of person. Eventually, we arrived opposite Le Touquet. And a name that sounds like a peace tree, but is, in fact, a town. They say it is a place for vacationers, rich ones who wear hats. I could see no hats from the ship, only a long beach and buildings that tried not to look expensive. They failed. There was a boardwalk, barely visible, the kind people stroll upon when they've run out of better ideas. I made a sketch of Le Touquet. It was mostly rectangles and vague waves. I included a small hat in the corner, for flavor. By mid-afternoons, we passed dunes again. They rolled gently, like someone had once attempted to make hills, but got bored halfway through. Seagulls circled overhead, each one sounding slightly more judgmental than the last. I ignored them, mostly. A crewman asked what we were looking for. I told him details. He hasn't spoken to me since. The day faded quietly. The sky turned from grey to a slightly different grey. We dropped anchor in calm water. I opened my journal, stared at the page, and wrote, "The coast continues. It does not care who watches. I do, and I am watching, slowly." Day 15. This morning, a bird landed on the railing. It stared at me. I stared back. After some time, we both looked away, embarrassed, perhaps, by how little we had to say. The coast came into view again. Still France, still there. We reached Berck-sur-Mer, a name that sounds like a cough. I am told it is pronounced Bear, but the ship's cook insists it should be Blair. Either way, it is not a glamorous name, and it suits the place perfectly. The beach is enormous. A vast plain of wet sand, stretching out toward the sea, like it's trying to escape the town behind it. There were kites in the sky, dozens of them, none of them doing anything particularly impressive, just floating, like ideas not fully formed. We did not go ashore. There was nothing urgent about Beck. It didn't seem to want us. And we respected that. South of there, the coast begins to sag a little. Not a dramatic sag, more of a quiet slouch. At Fort Mahan Plage, I spotted rows of beach houses with cheerful paint. They lined up like pastel teeth in a politely smiling mouth. I waved at them. They did not wave back. I was told this town is known for its mussels. I saw no evidence of this. Just one sign shaped like a clam. I wrote in the journal, "Mussels possible. Investigation inconclusive." The wind picked up in the afternoon. It tried to move the ship forward with confidence. But we responded with a strong sense of reluctance. The sails flapped lazily. Even the ropes sighed. It was a productive sort of nothing. We passed through Coastline, a beach town so quiet it may have been imaginary. I could see a few umbrellas, closed, waiting, perhaps forever. The dunes here are particularly rounded. Soft, like the hills of a dream you forget by breakfast. One of the crew asked how much coastline remains. I told him, enough. He nodded and quietly chewed on a biscuit. We said nothing else for the rest of the hour. The day ended with a burnt orange sky. The kind of sky that makes people say things like, "It's beautiful," even though it says nothing back. I returned to my cabin and recorded the most important observation of the day. The land continues. So do I, both of us, out of habit. Day 16. We awoke to a sunrise that appeared to be doing its best. It peeked over the horizon with the enthusiasm of someone arriving late to a meeting they didn't want to attend. The sea reflected it anyway. That seemed generous. Today we approached Saint-Quentin-en-Toulmont. It is not a town, exactly, more a collection of things loosely pretending to be one. Huts, grasses, a vague road, and birds, many birds, all of them very loud. I wrote, "This place is for birds. The humans are merely tolerated." We followed the shoreline into Marcanterre, a region which, I was told, is a nature reserve. Indeed, the trees looked slightly more respected than usual. I saw a deer. It looked surprised. So did I. The land here is marshy, flat, and indecisive. Sand becomes grass, becomes water, becomes sand again, like someone spilled geography and left it. I noted the chaos fondly. Midday brought us opposite Le Crottat, a small seaside town tucked neatly into the curve of the bay. From the ship, it looked like a place designed by someone who values order, but not too much. Boats lined the harbour in a way that felt less like docking and more like napping. There is an old hotel there, famous, apparently, for being visited by a writer. I did not recognize the name, but I pretended I did. It felt polite. Further along the curve is Saint-Valery-sur-Somme, perched above the river like a cat that knows it is important. There were stone walls, colourful houses, and what I believe was a very old gate. It looked like it had been closed often, but with very little conviction. I considered sketching it, but the light was wrong. And also, I didn't feel like it. We lingered in the bay for a while. The tide was out. Very out. It seemed to have taken most of the water with it and gone somewhere else entirely. I made a note. Somme Bay. All land, no commitment. As evening settled, the ship gently turned south again. One of the crew spotted a lighthouse in the distance. He asked if we should note it. I told him no. He looked relieved. The stars came out, slowly, like they were deciding whether to bother. Back in my cabin, I opened my journal and wrote, "The world remains unhurried. I have chosen to match its pace." Day 17. Today began with a gull stealing a piece of bread. No one tried to stop it. We all agreed it seemed to need it more than we did. There was something honest about its theft. I respected that. We continued along the coast, approaching Cayo-sur-Mer, a town famous for its pebbles. Not large ones, not shiny, just many. The beach is endless and stony. A grey stretch of polite discomfort. The kind of beach that says, you may visit, but you will not enjoy it too much. Wooden cabins line the boardwalk, white with blue doors, all identical. so much so that I began to wonder if time had gotten stuck. I counted 76 before I gave up. Possibly 77. I lost one when I blinked. The town behind the beach is quiet, content, perhaps, to be behind the beach. No one waved, no one needed to. Beyond it, we reached the Iredell Point, a sliver of land that seems to exist solely to remind you that the coast can still surprise you with how little it changes. We saw seals, several. They looked round and deeply indifferent to our presence. I felt a kinship. I sketched one. It resembled a potato. I wrote underneath, seal, possibly vegetable. From there, the coast curved slightly inland. We entered the mouth of the Somme River once more, a place already noted and still undecided about whether it's a river or a retirement home for water. Drifting out again, we passed Ault, a town perched on white cliffs that seemed far too dramatic for its personality. The buildings are close together, as though huddling for warmth or gossip. A narrow church steeple pokes out above them, like someone raising a finger mid-thought. I admired its persistence. Below, the waves crashed with more enthusiasm than usual. The cliffs did not mind. We sailed close enough to hear the wind whistle through abandoned railings. It sounded like a flute being played by someone with no training but a lot of confidence. Evening came with orange clouds and the sense that the day had tried something new and then changed its mind. One of the crew asked if we were nearly done with the coastline. I told him the truth. The coastline is never done. It only becomes elsewhere. He seemed satisfied with that, or tired. It can be hard to tell. I returned to my cabin and wrote one final line before extinguishing the lantern. Today, the stones were many, the seals were round, and the sky politely magnificent. Day 18. This morning, a rope came loose and struck me gently in the back. The crew asked if I was all right. I told them yes, that it felt more like a suggestion than an injury. They nodded. The rope was secured again. It will not change the course of history. We approached Le Tréport, a port town resting between chalk cliffs that appear to have stood there simply because no one told them not to. The town itself is compact, nestled tightly into the vertical walls, like someone pressed it there with a thumb. Buildings lean forward slightly, as if they are straining to see the water. There is a funicular, a kind of elevator for hills, moving up the cliff. I watched it rise very slowly. Then I looked away. It was still rising. Eventually, I believe it reached the top, but I can't be certain. I wrote, a vertical journey, unhurried and perhaps unneeded. We saw fishermen along the quay, not fishing, just standing, talking. One of them pointed at a bucket. I dared not look inside. Past Les Tréport is Mers-les-Bains, a town with colourful houses and balconies that appear to have opinions. Pinks, blues, greens, painted in hopeful tones against the reliable grey of the cliffs. From the ship, it looked like a painter got distracted halfway through and decided to let the town finish itself. It didn't, but the effort was appreciated. We drifted slowly. Waves lapped at the howl in polite rhythm, the kind of rhythm that says, we'll continue, but we're not in a rush. There was an old man sitting alone on the seawall. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting. I admired him immensely. Further down the coast, the cliffs began to change. Less white, more crumbly, more like cliffs with stories they'd rather not tell. The sky clouded over again, this time with purpose. We passed U, a town with a name so short it feels accidental. I blinked and nearly missed it. Still, I wrote it down, out of fairness. Evening arrived with a chilled breeze and the faint sound of gulls arguing over something unknowable. They circled us briefly, then left. Apparently, we were not worth the trouble. The lantern in my cabin flickered 3 times as I sat down to write. Each flicker was slower than the last. A perfect metaphor. I dipped my quill, looked at the page, and wrote. Today, the towns were pressed against cliffs. The sky remained undecided, and the sea gently forgot we were here. Day 19. Rain began before we did. Not a storm, nothing dramatic. Just the kind of slow, persistent drizzle that feels more like a decision than a weather event. It soaked the deck, blurred the horizon, and whispered to the sails, "You weren't going anywhere important, were you?" We adjusted our course along the edge of Dieppe, a proper port town, not shy, not hidden, just there. The buildings are tall and grey, built with the kind of confidence that says, "We've done this before." The harbour is wide, shaped like an open hand, ready to accept whatever the sea throws into it. Boats came and went with purpose. We did not. We simply hovered near the edge, like someone too shy to enter a room full of strangers. There is a castle on the hill, sturdy, square, and slightly annoyed. It has been there for centuries, enduring rain like this and probably worse. I nodded at it. It did not nod back. That's fair. Beyond Dieppe, the coast grows restless. It juts out in small cliffs and tucked-away beaches, like it's trying on different personalities. None of them quite fit. We passed Varangeville-sur-Mer, a name far too large for the place it describes. There's a church there, right at the edge of the cliff. Brave. Or perhaps it was built first, before the cliff knew how to retreat. Graves lined the edge. A cemetery facing the sea. A bold design choice. One of the crew muttered something about the wind smelling like stone. I'm not sure what he meant, but I understood him completely. We did not stop. We rarely do. Further south, the cliffs continue, chalky and sheer. They crumble in places. Softly, with regret. A small beach emerged between 2 headlands. I do not know its name. That didn't stop me from naming it myself. Not quite sure bay. It felt appropriate. The rain eased as evening arrived. The clouds, apparently bored with their performance, drifted inland to bother someone else. I stood in the deck alone for a time. The wind had grown gentle. The waves had grown shy. The sky indifferent, as always. Back in my cabin, the lantern refused to light on the first try. Then again on the second. The third time, it flickered and stayed. I respected its struggle. I opened my journal and wrote. Today, the rain came first. The land came later. And somewhere in between, we remembered we were still at sea. Day 20. There was mist this morning. Not fog. Mist. Lighter. More artistic. The kind of weather that prefers to drift in slowly, touch everything softly, and leave without ever really explaining itself. We glided along the coast near Views-les-Roses, a village whose name promises flowers, poetry, and perhaps an accordion. We saw none of those things. The houses were modest, with sloping roofs and tidy chimneys. There were gardens, I think. Or maybe just organized greenery. It was difficult to tell through the mist. Which, of course, was the point. A stream enters the sea here. Tiny, polite, apologetic. I was told it is the shortest river in France. I could not confirm this, but I believed it immediately. It felt like something a river would be proud of, in a very quiet way. I made a sketch. It looked like a string on a plate. I labeled it Views River. Small, committed. The cliffs remained with us throughout the day, chalky, crumbling, occasionally dramatic, but mostly stable, like a retired actor who still wears their old costumes around the house. We passed Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer, a gentle place. So gentle, in fact, I almost missed it. But a red roof caught the light for half a second. I considered that a wave. The coastline bent again, just slightly. Not enough to change direction, but enough to remind you that nothing ever really moves in a straight line. Further along was Quiberville, a village with a beach that is mostly stone. I watched a man attempt to lie down on it. He lasted 23 seconds. I timed him. I noted stones. Firm, man, less so. The tide was low by late afternoon. Very low. It exposed parts of the earth that were clearly not expecting company. We sailed over sandbanks that moments before had not existed, or, at least, not cared to show themselves. The ship sighed with every turn. So did the crew. No one spoke until the sun dipped behind the cliffs. Well, then someone said, that was a long day. It wasn't, but I agreed anyway. In the cabin, the candle melted too quickly, as if trying to end the day before I could write it down. I dipped the quill, let it hover, then wrote. Today, the river was short, the beach was hard, and the coastline, like everything else, refused to be simple. Day 21. The sun rose today, as it often does, with no great ceremony, but a kind of dependable dignity. We noticed it, briefly, then went back to doing almost nothing. We sailed south, hugging the coast, near Varengeville-sur-Mer once again. The cliffs there shift between white and grey, as if trying on moods. Some stand straight and proud. Others lean slightly forward, curious, perhaps, or just tired. A path winds down the rock face, carved with more hope than stability. I saw a goat on it, or possibly a very determined dog. Either way, it was alone and appeared confident. I made a note. Cliff path, navigable by hoof or boldness. The village above is scattered, as though a child placed it there in handfuls. There is a chapel near the edge. They say the painter Monet once visited. The sea looked exactly the same when he did. From the ship, we could see gravestones leaning against the wind. I wondered if they ever fell, or if they simply adjusted slightly each decade. We continued on. By midday we reached Pourville-sur-Mer, a beach of pebbles and cliffs, framed by modest villas who seemed to be staring politely at the ocean without making eye contact. A single person walked along the shore. They stopped occasionally, bent over, and picked something up. Shells, perhaps. Regret, possibly. The beach curved gently westward. The sea kept its distance. A gull landed on the mast. It looked around. It squawked once, loudly, then took off again. Its message was unclear, but definite. Past Proville, the landscape softened. The cliffs grew shorter, the beaches broader. Grass returned, in cautious patches. We passed Hotel-sur-Mer, a quiet place with no particular features to note. I noted that. They wrote, Hotel, present, content with being unremarkable. The afternoon passed slowly. The wind came and went, like a bored assistant. We drifted more than we sailed. One of the crew played a tune on a tin whistle. It wasn't good, but it was sincere. We applauded. The applause was also sincere. The stars arrived early tonight. They blinked through a pale violet sky, then grew bolder, as if to say, "You're not alone, just very, very far from anything." In the cabin, I relit the candle that had gone out twice. It resisted, but eventually agreed. I opened the journal and wrote. Today the land bent, the sea held back, and even the silence had a rhythm. I am learning to listen to it. Day 22. The morning arrived with a cold breeze and a reluctant sun. The sky was pale and uncertain, like parchment before the ink. The sea was still, though not calm, more like it had paused to think about something, and forgotten what. We continued south, following the edge of Normandy's crumbling cliffs. Their faces were jagged today, as if they'd been chipped away by time and mild irritation. We passed Saint-Martin-en-Campagne, a village so quiet I wasn't sure it was awake. Smoke rose from one chimney. That was enough to mark its existence. Soon after came Penly, a town notable for having both a beach and a nuclear power plant, though neither seemed particularly proud of the other. The plant loomed quietly in the distance, humming like a polite giant, trying not to intrude. I made a note. Penly, where atoms split and waves crash. Unrelated, but nearby. A fishing boat crossed our path. The captain waved. I waved back. A moment passed. Then we both realized we'd already gone too far to say anything else. Such is life at sea. The coastline here tried to vary its features. There were rocks, then pebbles, when a bit of grass pretending to be a field. Nothing lasted more than a minute. It was like watching land try on disguises. By mid-afternoon we neared Dieppe once again, this time from a different angle. It looked more confident from the south. The cliffs behind it rose sharply, like exclamation marks with nothing to shout about. We passed just wide of Proville-sur-Mer, a familiar name by now, but no more revealing than before. I could just make out the same red rooftops, the same pebbled arc of beach, the same quiet sort of existence that feels deliberate. The wind picked up in short, confused bursts. The sails protested. So did the cook. We ignored them both. Late in the day, we drifted past a cliffside meadow. Sheep grazed there, indifferent to the sea and everything beyond it. One of them looked up, just once. I felt seen. We dropped anchor in a shallow cove, as the sun dipped behind a curtain of clouds. The light turned bronze, then dimmed, like someone slowly turning down the world's brightness. In the cabin, the candle lit on the first try, a small but noteworthy victory. I sat quietly for a while, letting the silence settle around me like dust. Then I opened my journal and wrote, "Today, the sea said little, the cliffs said less, and I listened carefully to both." Day 23. The sky was silver this morning, not grey, not white. Silver, like an old coin left in a drawer too long. The light it cast made everything look important, even if nothing had changed. We resumed our journey along the coast, the ship gliding quietly past Sotteville-sur-Mer, a small place, tucked between cliffs that lit like bookends, holding up a story no one's quite finished. From the sea, I saw a church steeple and a few scattered roofs. They looked like they'd rather be inland, but had made peace with the view. There are stairs here, hundreds of them, carved into the cliff face, winding down from the top like a question mark without an answer. No one was using them, which seemed wise. The sea was calm, not still, just cooperative. The wind offered suggestions rather than commands. We accepted them politely. Further along, we passed Saint-Touba-sur-Mer, not to be confused with the other Saint-Touba, which we passed several days ago. This one had fewer houses, a flatter beach, and a distinct air of not being in a rush. I saw a single figure sitting near the shoreline, not moving, not fishing, not looking for anything, just sitting. I admired that. Around midday, we approached Vales-les-Roses again, from the opposite side. It was no less misty, no more floral. The houses watched us pass, like quiet neighbors who know your name but choose not to say it. We did not stop. We rarely do. Past the village, the cliffs grew chalkier, crumbling in delicate, hesitant slides. It was the kind of erosion that looks more like a sigh than a collapse. I wrote, "The land is not falling, it is letting go, carefully." One of the crew asked if I ever tire of writing about the same things. Cliffs, wind, quiet towns. I told him I don't write because they are different. I write because they are not. The sun broke through the clouds in the late afternoon, a single shaft of gold on the water, like a finger pointing nowhere in particular. The crew stared at it for a while, then looked away, as if embarrassed to be caught admiring something without a reason. We dropped anchor near a shallow bay. No name on the map. I gave it one. Bay of not much. It felt accurate. Back in the cabin, I added a rough sketch of the cliffs, a few words, and this. Today the land stayed quiet, the sea stayed near, and I stayed willing to listen. Day 24. The morning began with a creak, not from the ship, but from my back. The two are often confused. Both are wooden. Both complain in damp weather. We set our course toward Saint-Valery-en-Caux, a harbour town flanked by steep white cliffs, which close in like two hands around a secret. The harbour gate opened slowly, letting in the tide with a kind of reluctant ceremony. A few fishing boats stirred. A man waved, or stretched. It was hard to tell. The town itself clings to the cliffs in tight rows. Slate roofs, quiet windows, chimneys like punctuation marks, trying to explain something you missed. I saw a lighthouse at the edge, short and squat. The kind of lighthouse that says, "You can come in, but I'm not thrilled about it." We did not dock. I could see a bakery from the ship, which made it worse. The cliffs to the west are high and straight, white as bone. They rise suddenly and unapologetically, cutting a stark edge into the sky. We followed them in silence, the ship moving at half interest. There was a sea cave at one point, small, dark, and likely full of secrets. Or crabs. We did not investigate. The water here is shallow and socky. It rolls in, then hesitates, then tries again, like a speech being rehearsed. The foam along the shore lingers longer than it should, like a guest who won't leave, even after dessert has been cleared. We passed Villette-sur-Mer by midday, a beach town with rows of beach huts, all painted the same shade of optimism. From this distance, they look like pastel teeth. I waved at them. I think they waved back. The wind shifted just slightly in the afternoon, enough to remind us it could change things, but chose not to. The sails adjusted. So did I. A gull followed us for nearly an hour. It landed on the rigging, blinked once, then flew away again, satisfied, I assume, that we were not interesting. The crew cleaned ropes, or at least moved them around, convincingly. I took notes. That felt fair. Evening arrived on tiptoe. The cliffs grew darker, then blue, then almost gone. The horizon faded like a thought you meant to write down, but didn't. I stood at the stern as the sun dipped into the sea, and for a brief moment, everything paused. Back in the cabin, the lantern flickered twice and settled. I opened the journal and wrote. Today, the cliffs stood tall, the sea whispered low, and the sky forgot to finish its sentence. Day 25. Today began with fog, thick, woolen, and entirely uninterested in our plans. It wrapped the ship like a second sail, heavier but less helpful. Visibility was theoretical. Still, we moved forward, propelled by habit more than purpose. We passed Polwell, or at least we believe we did. It's hard to be certain when the world is reduced to 5 meters in any direction, and the occasional sound of dripping. Someone on board swore they saw a chimney. Another claimed it was just a gull sitting vertically. I recorded both versions. History, after all, is flexible. Eventually, the mist thinned, revealing more of the same. Cliffs, fields, more cliffs. The sea returned to its usual routine, gently pushing, gently pulling, never quite deciding. By late morning, we neared Saint-Romain-du-Colbosc, or possibly Saint-Romain-sur-Mer. There were signs of human life, hedges trimmed just enough, windows shuttered deliberately, laundry hanging in still air. But no people. It was as if the town had stepped out for a moment and asked the sea to watch things. I saw a dog on a balcony. It stared out at the water with a seriousness I rarely achieve. I nodded at it. It did not return the gesture, but I felt acknowledged. The coast began to shift by the afternoon. The cliffs grew lower, more polite. The land behind them rolled instead of rising. Farms appeared, scattered, slow-moving fields, stitched together with fences that seemed built more for tradition than livestock. We drifted past Les Petites Dalles, a name that sounds like a polite apology. The beach there is made of stones, but not dramatic stones, just present. The waves tapped them gently, like someone knocking to see if anyone's home. Later, we saw a pair of children flying a kite on the hill above Les Grandes. The kite wobbled, then dipped, then soared with uncertain elegance. It reminded me of our ship. The wind returned just before sunset. Enough to push us south, but not enough to insist. The sails responded with a tired flutter, like stretching after a nap you didn't quite earn. In the cabin, the candle lit immediately, as if eager to be of use. I let it flicker for a moment before writing. You were wrong. Then, on the last blank line of the page, I put this. Today, the fog arrived first. The wind arrived late. And everything in between felt exactly like drifting through a dream that refuses to end. Day 26. The morning sky was colorless. Not grey, not blue, just undecided. It cast a world in a soft, unfinished light, as though the day had been sketched but not painted. The sea agreed. It moved but without conviction. We continued our slow crawl down the coast and reached Fécamp by mid-morning. A real harbour. Busy, if not bustling. Boats clinked against their moorings. Gulls circled overhead, like rumours. The town sits in a valley between chalk cliffs, cradled by stone and memory. From a distance, it looks important. Up close, it looks tired. There's a long pier that juts out into the sea, guarded by two lighthouses, one red, one green. They do not speak to each other, but they seem to get along. I like that. We did not dock, we never do, but I watched as a man carried an enormous fish across the quay. It hung from his hand, like a question he hadn't decided how to ask. I made a note. Fécamp, where the fish are large and the intentions unclear. The cliffs after Fécamp were tall again, bright white, but softened by distance and erosion. Occasionally, a narrow path led down to the sea, carved by goats, locals, or perhaps ghosts. I imagined using one. I imagined not surviving. I moved on. By afternoon, we passed Yéport, a charming village curled into the land like it had fallen asleep there. The beach was active. Boats pulled up onto the stones, nets drying in the breeze, children yelling at nothing in particular. Smoke rose from several chimneys. It smelled like wood and fish and familiarity. The houses here are close together, as if they formed a small conspiracy against weather and time. I respect their strategy. We followed the coastline as it bent slightly inland, then returned. The hills above were dotted with cows, all staring in the same direction. I looked that way too. Nothing. Just sky. I suppose they know things we don't. As sunset approached, we saw Vaucottes, less a village, more a name someone whispered onto a map. A few rooftops, a winding road, a hint of garden. The cliffs on either side stood close, as though protecting it or preparing to forget it. The light turned golden, then amber, then gone. Shadows stretched across the water like long fingers with nowhere to point. I returned to my cabin. The candle sputtered before settling, as if clearing its throat. We sentenced. I opened the journal and wrote, "Today The sea showed restraint. The cliffs stood tall, and the coast, though unchanged, reminded me that not all journeys are meant to be surprising. Day 27. The morning began with wind. A soft, persistent kind that wasn't strong enough to cause trouble, but refused to be ignored. It rustled the sails and tugged at our sleeves, like a child asking for attention. We gave it some. Today we approached Etretat, and even I must admit, it is spectacular. The cliffs here rise like great frozen waves, pale and proud, curved and carved by time and water into something almost theatrical. Arches stretch over the sea like petrified bridges. One spire rises from the surf like a single finger pointing skyward. Not in accusation, but perhaps in wonder. We passed the famous Falaise de Vaux, the great stone arch that has seen more paintings than storms. It was quiet this morning. No tourists, no shouts, just wind, water, and the faint sound of time passing through rock. I made a sketch. It was not very good, but then again, neither is the sea at staying still. Etretat itself rests between these formations, a town made small by the grandeur that surrounds it. Slate rooftops lean into one another. Church spires peek up modestly, like they know better than to compete with cliffs. I could see people walking along the tops, silhouetted against the sky. Tiny figures staring out at the ocean as I stared back. We did not dock. The harbor is shallow, and we are not here to arrive anywhere. The ship drifted quietly past Manaport, the second arch, larger, wider, emptier. A hole in the land, a doorway to nowhere. I liked it very much. The cliffs stretched on, bright against the green hills above. A single cow grazed near the edge, entirely unimpressed by its surroundings. That seemed appropriate. We sailed in silence for a long while. The cliffs faded slowly behind us, like someone exiting a room, but not quite closing the door. Later in the afternoon, the coast softened again. The rocks receded. Beaches returned. Towns blinked into view, smaller, quieter. We passed Le Tillot, a village hidden behind trees and hedgerows, reluctant to be noticed. I noticed it anyway. Evening came with low clouds and golden light. The sea settled. The wind gave up. In the cabin, the lantern glowed steadily. No flickers, no resistance, just light. I opened a journal and wrote. Today, the cliffs made promises. The wind delivered none. And I remembered that awe can arrive quietly, like everything else that matters. Day 28. We began the day with soft skies and gentler tides. The horizon was a smooth line, nothing rising, nothing falling, just balance. The ship moved easily, with the kind of grace that only comes from doing something for a very long time with no one watching. The dramatic cliffs of Etretat now behind us, we entered a stretch of coastline that seemed content. Fewer statements. More suggestions. The land no longer soared, it reclined. We passed Benneville first, though you'd barely know it. A cluster of houses, a road, a slope, all of it folding gently into the hills. A dog barked once. It was unclear if the bark was directed at us or at existence in general. Not long after came Le Portrait Captain Tiffer, which sounds more like a chapter title than a place. There's a lighthouse here, tall, white, and functional. It doesn't try to impress. It just does its job. I respect that. A thin road winds its way to the top of the cape. I saw no one on it, but I liked knowing it was there. The sea deepened in color through the morning. It turned from grey to blue to something almost green, a thoughtful green, the kind you see in glass bottles left in windows. We moved slowly past Le Havre-Antifer, an oil terminal nestled between cliffs and cranes. It felt industrial. Not rude, just practical. Metal replaced stone. Silence gave way to hums and distant clanks. I made a note. The sea continues, even when the shore forgets to be poetic. By early afternoon, the coast had flattened. Fields stretched out to meet it. Grassy meadows sloped lazily toward the shore. Cows appeared again, scattered like commas in a long sentence. We drifted near Villaville, a charming little town that seems to lean slightly, as if listening to the sea's secrets. The houses here have shutters painted in gentle colors. One of them was red. Not a loud red, more like a red that remembered being red once. A woman stood near the water's edge, holding her shoes in one hand. She wasn't moving. I watched her until she became part of the landscape, then looked away. Evening descended with warm light and slow wind. The sea gave us one final push before quieting. The air smelled faintly of grass, salt, and something sweet I couldn't name. In the cabin, I lit the lantern without thinking. It flickered once, then settled. I turned to a fresh page and wrote. Today, the land exhaled, the sea listened, and nothing demanded attention. I find that comforting. Day 29. The wind carried a hint of change today. Not a storm, not a chill, just the soft suggestion that the land ahead would be different. I did not mind. I've grown used to changes that arrive slowly. We approached Saint-Juan-Bruneval in the pale morning light. A quiet town, resting just behind a broad beach and a wall of trees, half visible through sea mist. The cliffs here are more fragmented, broken in parts, low in others, as if they've grown tired of being dramatic. I understand the feeling. The shoreline dipped into a long bay near Le Havre, a city too large to ignore and too distant today to describe. From afar, it resembles a puzzle. Cranes, rooftops, chimneys, and shapes moving with some purpose. We did not approach. Cities are for those who seek destinations. We are only passing. The land now bent inward, forming the northern edge of the Seine estuary, a wide, lazy mouth that spills into the channel, like a river that never quite wakes up. The water turned brownish-green. The tides grew confused. Everything moved slower. I made a note, estuary, where the sea forgets how to be the sea. We drifted toward Honfleur, though we did not enter. I could see its bell tower rising above the trees. The town is known for artists, sailors, and narrow streets that twist like questions. I imagined its cafes, its markets, its people with hats and time. I imagined never leaving. Seagulls followed us here, louder, somehow more urban. Their cries had opinions. One landed on the rail and stared at me until I gave it a crumb of hard biscuit. It took it and flew away without thanks. I admired its efficiency. The afternoon brought stillness. The tide turned inward. The wind folded into itself. Even the sun seemed to dim its enthusiasm. The ship floated quietly, sails half raised, like a thought someone began but never finished. We passed mudflats, low islands, reeds. The sound of the sea was replaced by the sound of birds, thousands, all singing different songs in the same key. One of the crew asked what we were looking at. I told him something between a beginning and an end. He seemed satisfied. Evening came in lavender layers. The estuary glowed in a way I cannot describe, only remember. The towns on either side lit their lamps, their lights blurred in the rising mist, like distant dreams deciding whether to return. In the cabin, I opened my journal without lighting the candle. I let the fading light do its work. Then I wrote. Today, the land became river. The sea became quiet. And everything felt like something waiting to be named. Day 30. Today marks a quiet milestone. 30 days at sea, tracing the edge of a country that seems in no hurry to end. I didn't expect it to feel like anything, and yet it does. The river was wide this morning, not wide in a proud, sweeping way, but in the quiet, low-shouldered way of something that's been around a long time and doesn't feel the need to prove itself anymore. We sailed slowly inland, following the northern curve of the Seine, though the sea still lingered behind us. The water darkened, then cleared, then darkened again. It didn't matter. We were not here to judge. We passed Vassouis, a name I nearly missed on the map. A handful of rooftops tucked beneath trees, so still it felt imagined. There was a small dock, unused, a rowboat tied to a post, a heron standing beside it, considering things. Soon after came Criquebeuf, another soft name, another gentle bend in the land. The houses here are modest and half-hidden, as if trying not to interrupt the conversation between the river and the shore. Fields roll down toward the water's edge. A single windmill turned lazily in the distance. I watched it until it disappeared behind a hill. It had made new promises and fulfilled all of them. The riverbanks were lined with reeds and low stone walls. Every so often, a path or track led back into the countryside, each one an invitation I politely declined. By midday, we reached Pendipi. The beach here was long and quiet, the kind of place where time forgets to move. A few figures walked along the shoreline, far enough away to be shapes, not people. I made a note. Solitude is easier to observe than to explain. The crew said little today. Perhaps they felt it too. The sense of nearing something, or maybe leaving something else behind. We moved slowly, not because the river was shallow, but because there was no reason to go faster. Clouds gathered in the late afternoon, thick and thoughtful. Rain fell, briefly, then stopped. The deck stayed wet long after, as if holding on to the memory of it. The estuary narrowed. Trees lined the banks now, tall and quiet. We passed under birds flying inland. They didn't look back. Evening came with a hush. Not silence, just hush. The ship rocked gently. The anchor dropped with a soft splash. We were not where we began, and we were not finished. In the lantern light, I opened the journal and wrote. Today, the river welcomed us without ceremony. The land softened. The air grew still, and something unnamed settled beside me. Not heavy, just present. Day 31. The morning fog was thick and affectionate. Not the kind that hides, but the kind that holds. It wrapped around the ship like an old coat, pulled from storage. Musty and familiar. I didn't mind. We drifted further up the Seine, the river now fully committed to being a river. The sea was behind us, though it lingered and scent and mood. The water grew darker, thicker, reflective. Every tree, every cloud, every passing bird appeared twice. It made the world feel doubled, yet no clearer. We passed Barneville-sur-Seine, a village that appeared only as rooftops and smoke. A church bell rang. Once. Just once. Enough to confirm it existed. I made a note. Barneville sounds like a suggestion. Rings like a reminder. The river curved again, tighter now, as though unsure of its direction. The land here was pastoral, hushed. Cows grazed in distant fields, and every so often a fence leaned at an angle that said, I tried. We approached Le Mesnil-sur-Gemège, a name longer than the village. A handful of homes sat beneath poplar trees, each one leaning slightly in the same direction, as if gently pulled of contact. A bicycle was propped against pearls. I liked that. The sails drooped. We moved as if through memory. I saw two figures on the bank, an older couple, perhaps. They stood together, watching the river like it owed them something. Or maybe they had given it everything, and now stood simply to remember. They did not wave. I did not expect them to. We passed Jumège in the early afternoon. The remains of a great abbey rise here, silent and skeletal, wrapped in ivy and echo. The walls are pale and high, punctured by arches that no longer hold anything up, except maybe stories. I saw it from the river. It watched us pass. It has seen better ships. I considered writing a poem about it, but the moment passed before the words arrived. I settled for a sketch, incomplete, and leaning left. The crew spoke little today. The sound of the river brushing against the hull filled the space between us. No one filled it further. Evening brought the smell of damp wood and soft soil. The river narrowed again. Trees pressed closer to the banks. Arms crossed. The sky turned gold, then grey. A heron rose from the reeds. It flapped once, then vanished. In the cabin, the candle burned low and steady. I sat for a while before writing. Then, today, the river folded inward. The land grew thoughtful, and I followed, without knowing what I was following. Day 32. The morning light came filtered, not through clouds, but through trees. Tall ones, on both sides of the river, standing like librarians in a long, quiet hall. They didn't move, neither did we at first. The Seine was calm today, perfectly so. The kind of calm that feels earned, not offered. Mist rose from its surface, in slender threads, like something being unspooled slowly. The ship creaked gently. That was the only sound. We passed Hurtleville, a small village that looked like it had once hosted a celebration and had never quite packed everything away. Strings of empty lights hung between poles. A bench faced the river. It had no occupant. I imagined someone had once sat there every morning, then stopped. I wrote, Hurtleville, still waiting for the second act. The river curved again, tight and thoughtful. The land seemed closer now, not just geographically, but emotionally. Hills leaned in. Trees arched overhead. The world was becoming a corridor. We passed orchards, apple trees in slow rows, some in bloom, others bare and patient. Bees hovered. I could hear them. One buzzed past my ear and kept going. I admired its direction. The crew adjusted the sails with the precision of people doing things they've done 100 times. None of them urgent. One of them hummed. I didn't recognize the tune. It might not have had one. By midday, we neared Meandering, a larger village by river standards. There was movement here, someone unloading crates, a child chasing a bird, an old man sweeping a doorway that didn't need it. Pattered, the river narrowed as if pausing to listen. We waved at no one. No one waved back. It was perfect. In the afternoon, clouds returned. They weren't angry, just heavy. The sky darkened gently, like a womb with the lights turned down one notch. The wind stayed soft. The current carried us forward, like a hand on the small of the back, not pushing, but guiding. We passed under a low bridge. A single car crossed. I wondered where it was going. Then I realized I didn't care. That felt peaceful. The trees began to thin as we passed St. Wandrel, home to another abbey, half hidden in the forest. I didn't see it, but I felt it. That old silence that buildings carry, even after their voices are gone. Evening arrived dressed in green and gold. The river held the light longer than the sky. The shore reflected nothing, but offered everything. The day ended without punctuation. In the cabin, I opened the journal without lighting the lamp. I wrote in the dark, by memory more than sight. Today the river closed its mouth and listened. So did I. Day 33. The river was glass this morning. Not metaphorically, not like glass. It was glass. Still, flawless, and impossibly flat. The ship floated on its reflection more than the water itself. For a moment, it felt as though we were sailing upside down. Birds crossed overhead. Their shadows trailed beneath them, and so much is much fire. We passed Caudebec encore in silence. It is a real town with a real church and real chimneys puffing on a smoke into the morning air. But today, it looked like a painting left unfinished. Details faded toward the edges. A bell chimed somewhere within. I did not count the hour. It wasn't important. There was a market setting up near the quay, tents rising like small, colorful hills. We were too far to hear the voices, but I imagined them. Greetings exchanged, prices guessed, bread admired. All of it wonderfully irrelevant to us. Beyond Caudebec, the river bent again. It is a shy river, always curving, never certain. The trees here were older, heavier, content to simply remain. Their roots reached down into the riverbank like fingers grasping old stories. The wind did not join us today. The sails hung in quiet agreement. The current took over, slow and insistent. I did not mind. We passed Villequier around midday, a village famous, or perhaps infamous, for grief. Victor Hugo washed his daughter here. He said, "The story clings to the stones like moss." I saw the house from the water. White walls, closed shutters, a garden of restrained sorrow. I thought of his journals. I imagined mine stacked beside his, one grand, one pointless. I smiled, then wrote, Villequier, where even the wind remembers to lower its voice. The crew was quiet today. Someone napped under a coil of rope. Another repaired a button that hadn't fallen off. I watched a river. In the distance, we saw cows wading in the shallows. One of them stared at us, not judgmentally, just curiously, like it, too, was writing something in its head. The afternoon passed like an exhale. Light softened, shadows lengthened. We reached a part of the river with no name on the map. I named it anyway. The curve that meant nothing. We anchored in still water near a muddy bank where reeds swayed gently without wind. A frog croaked once, then thought better of it. In the cabin, the candle burned with no flicker. The page waited. I dipped the pen, hesitated, then wrote. Today, the river gave nothing new, and yet I feel I've received something. A kind of silence that lingers, not behind me, but within. Day 34. The morning felt paused, not delayed, just suspended, like the river had placed a finger to its lips and asked the world to wait. We obliged. We passed Norville shortly after breakfast, though breakfast was really just warm bread and mutual tolerance. Norville appeared as a suggestion more than a settlement. A few rooftops, a path leading nowhere, a dog lying exactly where it pleased. I admired that. The river was narrow now, not cramped, just conversational. The trees on either side seemed closer together, as though conspiring. Their branches leaned in, dipping their fingers into the water with curious restraint. We passed a man fishing alone. He didn't look up. I respected his commitment to solitude. The line in his hand barely moved. It wasn't about the fish. By midday we approached Hertevent, a name I had to double-check, because it didn't look like a place so much as a memory someone left behind. There were 3 boats moored at a small dock. No movement. One of the boats was named Confidence. I took it as a sign. Of what, I wasn't sure. The land began to rise slightly. Low hills quilted with fields, hedgerows, and occasional sheep who stared like judges from a forgotten council. I stared back. I lost the contest. The wind returned faintly in the afternoon. Not enough to move us, but enough to remind us we were still allowed to feel something. The crew responded by adjusting a sail that didn't need adjusting. Tradition matters. We sailed past Saint Wandrille-Rançon in silence. There's another abbey there, older than memory, and only slightly more visible. I didn't see it clearly. I think that's the point. The sun began its descent earlier than usual, or so it seemed. The river turned bronze. A heron flapped overhead, banking gently as if reconsidering its destination. I envied that. The village of Vatteville-la-Rue drifted into view near dusk. The rooftops were warm with light, the smoke from their chimneys rising like soft-spoken greetings. The town looked cozy in a way that made me ache, very briefly. We did not stop. Evening folded around us like a coat that once belonged to someone else. The world dimmed. So did we. In the cabin, the lantern hissed before catching. I sat with the journal for a long while, not to think, just to sit. Eventually, I wrote, "Today the river narrowed, the land leaned in, and the distance between things became small enough to hear them breathing." 25 days along the edge of this land, and I'm still not sure if I've been mapping the coast, or if the coast has been quietly mapping me. But that's enough for today.